Hey everyone, welcome back to the texturing part of our Mace tutorial. I have Substance Painter 2019.2 and let's create a new project, and then let's start by selecting our low poly. And here we have it. Now what we need to do, first of all, I always like to be in the orthographic view. And then here under our texture settings, we want to go over to where it says Bake Mesh Maps. So now let's put our high poly in there. Here we have all the textures that we're going to bake. And usually 1K would probably be enough, but seriously, I want to be at the highest possible resolution. Put the dilation width at 32, subsampling to 8x8, and then make sure match by mesh name. And let's just disable the AO and the thickness bake for our first baking pass. And then let's start here. So the reason why I didn't bake with 1K would probably be just enough when you put that into a third-person game, that Mace. But it's always better to bake, with the highest possible texture resolution, because you can always scale down. But you can't just scale a 1K texture up to 4K. That's why we want to make sure we bake that here with maximum resolution, and that is 4K. So I decided not to cut out this part here where it bakes the normal map. It's really nice how now we have this preview that shows us exactly where our normal map is already done. And now it will tell us that it didn't find the ID map because we didn't have any color information on the mesh. So don't let that confuse you, that's okay. Now we bake the curvature map, and then we have our position map left. And it says it's at 60, now it's at 80, and we are done. Okay, we can ignore the Mace ID. So now let's take a look at it. You can press Shift to look at it from different lighting sources. You can rotate the sun. Now let's bake our AO and put it also to only say mesh name. And I like to have secondary rates at 256. Gonna put the subsampling to 2x2, otherwise that takes too long here with our AO map. And the quality is pretty much the same. If you have the time, then it might be worth to put it to 8x8. So now we're waiting here for our AO bake to finish, and I actually cut a part out of that. I just wanted to kind of stay with you here to go through the full process. But the AO bake takes quite some time. Either way, let's go ahead here and save our Substance Painter file, Mace, and save. So now we don't have to worry for it to crash. Well, actually we still should save every once in a while, but Substance Painter also has an autosave feature now. Let's create some folders here. I'm gonna have a wood folder, and then I'm gonna call this one metal 1, and this one here metal 2, and then this one here is our gold. So let's get started. We are in the material tab, and let's filter for wood. Let's drag this material into our wood folder. And let's put the rotation to a 90 so that these fibers are actually vertical and not horizontal, as they should be. And let's go into those technical parameters here and adjust our height range. I'm gonna bring it down quite a bit. Let's have it here at 0.03. which is still enough. You see some height information, but it's not as extreme as before. We can also work on our layers here. the layering of the wood structure, and I put it to 9, which looks pretty decent here. So let's do the next material, and I want that to be a smart material, which means it already comes as a layer composition grouped into a folder, and let's just drag it here into our metal folder. So that means we now have a folder in our metal folder, and you can see that the wood is still showing the information here. What we have to do to prevent that is go over here, put it to height, and now we have to change our blend mode. And you would think it's disable, but no, it's actually normal. So now you can see we don't have this wood fiber normal map here anymore. But of course we still have to do our masking work on it. So let's add a black mask here onto the metal folder. And I'm gonna use the polygon selection tool, put it here to our UV mode, and that way we can select our UV islands that we were defining before. And you just gotta make sure you apply that only to that spike that we were unwrapping. All the other spikes won't recognize if you click on them here with our selection tool. So that's the beauty here of having these UV islands nicely set up like we did it. Here we also have to find the unwrap part, and then we can just with a few clicks here define our metals and our woods and have our different materials. I'm gonna put that symmetry on here so that if we click something here on that side, it's certainly also affecting the other side. And then let's take a look here at these parts. They are also supposed to be metal, our handguard, and also that sphere here. And I'm thinking that this piece here should also be metal, but then we have our polygon mode, and I put it to black to deselect those ones here. That could also just be wood. Now let's put that back to white, our polygon fill, so that we can use it as technically masking information. And let's carry on here with our UV selection on more of these elements. This one here also, we unwrapped it individually. And then here just with the polygon mode, and then basically everything that we have here on top, let's select it with our UV tool. And that's already a nice looking maze, but of course we are far from done. We're gonna do more cool stuff on that. So let me work with our brush. Let's just have it completely solid, and let's bring it down here to a size where we can then frame this part here. And it's the same as in ZBrush. If you press Shift, you can make a connecting line. So let's just have this size here, 3.6 on my end for the brush size. And then over here, let's just also click down, press Shift, and click again to make this connection, which is exactly the same as in ZBrush. And it works just great. So let's also cover these side pieces here. Let me undo that. That wasn't as good as it could be. Want to make sure I am within our normal map information and not outside of it. So this piece here we also have to do. Same thing. So I'm just going to take it all the way down here and fill that all with the metal information. And then let's scale the brush down and also cover these parts here. looking good, and also looking good over here. So let's carry on with the next piece. And I want to add also metal here to that. So I'm just gonna press F1 to get into our 2D view. And for that we have to change our brush alignment and size space to UV and texture. So unfortunately we always have to do that when we jump into the texture mode. But this is just what it takes. And that makes it easier here for us to tackle these individual UV islands. And thanks to our normal map, we see exactly where we want our metal to be. And we're just gonna mask that out. So then we also have this piece here. Just gonna adjust the brush size and pressing Shift to make a connecting line here. And then let's also cover that part here, as well as this here. And then let's just make sure we got a bit of a curve there. And let me just zoom in and make sure I really get these parts here also part of our metal. And then do the same thing here on that side. And over here I also just want to have one more brush stroke over it, and that way we got this piece here already done, and we can carry on with that piece over here. So same thing really. Let's just be precise and make sure that everything that is showing on our normal map that is supposed to be that metal part is also here masked as metal. And that works pretty well here for that dome. Let's take a scroll down here, see where else we have some work to do. And actually here on that piece where we just left it, I want to make that a bit more precise here and also follow these lines. Okay, that looks good. And now let's see those pieces again. They are okay. Always good to double check everything. Let's add another metal layer. I'm gonna filter for steel on our smart materials, and then I want to have the steel medieval. No, how do you pronounce that? Medieval? Either way, let's create a black mask, and then with our brush set to white, let's actually not use the brush but our polygon fill, put it to polygon, and I want that part here actually not to be wood but metal. So now let's go back to our brush, and while we are here in our 2D view, let's add some metal information here to this grip part. So let's be precise. And you can see that we have the wood fiber here showing. So what I want to do is put the metal folder to normal. And now it's also fixed. We don't have this normal map information there. Forgot to do that. And yeah, let's just mask that out here. Also that tiny piece that we have there at the bottom. And then let's also do the ones here where the fingers are supposed to go. And the 2D view is just as precise as it gets. I guess the 3D view is also very precise. I usually toggle between them. but sometimes it's just handy to be here in the 2D view. And I mean, you see on the left side what's going on in the 3D view, but we really have everything perfectly flat in front of us here in the 2D. And that way we make sure that we're not making any errors. We are as precise as we can be. So let's see what we do next. I think that this steel medieval stylized has a bit too much wear on it, maybe. So I'm gonna go on that wear material and I'm gonna bring that color down a bit to a darker tone. Let me just toggle the channels. If you press C, you will get to the roughness channel. And let's bring our roughness also down here to 0.48. That way it's not as glossy as before. And now if we toggle it, it's not so extreme there, this wear layer. I'm actually gonna make it a little bit darker so that the contrast is not so strong. And let's create a new folder here on top of that steel medieval stylized, and let's call it grip pattern. Then we create a new fill layer, and I'm gonna have a black mask here on that grip pattern. Create another black mask on the fill layer, add a fill to that black mask, and let's filter for texture pattern. Sorry, just for pattern. And let's see which one we want to use. The hexagon. Let's try here with the hexagon. And now we have to bring the scale quite a bit up here so that we actually see it. And now back on the main fill layer. Let's scroll down here, and then we want our height information to be somewhere here at 0.16, and then let's disable the color channel. I'm just gonna jump into our roughness channel here once more by pressing C, and also I want to bring our roughness down. Maybe here 0.6, looking good. So it's not too glossy, but also not too matte. Let me go back here to that tiling pattern and scale that a little bigger. So now let's reactivate our black mask. That means nothing is showing of our grip pattern until we use our brush here. And that way we can then go in there and make that pattern where we want it to be. And we can be super precise. And I don't want it to affect too much there the outer regions. So let's just keep it here within that normal map groove here. And then also here, let's press Shift. You can change the mask when you press X to make it a black mask if you want to take away from information that you did. And for white, we're gonna add information. White brush means we add. The black brush means we take away, since we are on a black mask. If we had a white mask, it would be the other way around. And here, let's scale the brush down a bit, and also let's add information here to that part. I'm gonna leave these tiny knobs out that we have there at the bottom. Those are supposed to be a different material. Let's see here in the viewport. And let me just here with black brush, go around these corners once more to take a bit away from this noise. I want there to be a bit of a border. And then also let's do that here. Go around. Then we can increase the brush size and fill whatever is left. Let me just once more take the black brush. Pressing X will get you there. So now we have this really nice grip pattern here, which means that it won't slip out of your hand if you are knocking someone in his face with that. Of course, only in the virtual world. And let's carry on here by being on that Metal 2 folder, and let's add some more information here. Let's just find this part here that's above our grip, and let's select the black mask here for the Metal 2 folder, and I'm just gonna take it with a white brush here and then have some of this different looking metal here in the center of it to have some nice contrast. So now let's see where else we could make some use of that, and that would be here in the pretty much the center. And it's always taking a moment to find it here on the 2D view. But this here is the region that I also want to add that kind of a metal to it. And let me just add another fill layer here into that folder. And I'm just gonna make it a bright green, which will then make it easier for us to see where we actually put our masking information. That's just a temporary thing. We will then delete that layer later on and put it back to our metal, but this way it's guaranteed that we work as precise as we can be by having this nice contrast here. So also let's take it down here. Let's try to leave a little bit of a border there, so that we just don't fill the whole. And then also over here, let's use our Shift key and make some connections. And then here, let's also use, the Shift key. Let me undo that. That was a bit too much. And yeah, this green material definitely helps to be as accurate as we can be. I'm just gonna switch the brush here to a black brush, because those elements I want to be not affected by this kind of a metal. Remember, we also still have our gold folder that we haven't worked on yet, so maybe these tiny details could be gold later on. We'll see once we get to that. And you might have already noticed it, the spike is still showing some wood part. We're gonna fix that later. For now, let's focus here on this ring element. And that also will need some of this masking information. And I want it to be here at the top. So let's spare out everything that is in the center of it. But all the things that are on top of it, we're gonna have as different kind of a metal. Now let's just press Shift to cover also here the upper part. And then also here these little grooves that we have here on the sides. Sometimes it's enough just to stamp down. And now let's just make sure we didn't miss anything. And then we can continue here with the bottom part. Unfortunately, there's no way to use the symmetry, but I mean, that is really the work that is fun. I personally enjoy this the most. I am a big texturing fan. Texturing is for me definitely the most enjoyable part of the whole 3D art, everything. I mean, it's fun to model and to unwrap and all that, but of course it's not as fun as making the texture. I quite enjoy the high poly process. The low poly creation not so much, I gotta say, but it's just part of the job. It needs to be seen as one thing. And then also here we have another ring. And I guess, you know, we could have shared this particular ring because we have it 3 times on our texture. So technically we could have said, okay, we share the texture information so that we only have to texture it once here. And then all the other rings will also look like that. So we don't have so much work to texture it here, and we have to do it for all 3 of them. But then on the other hand, if we would have done that, that means that, let's say we want to put some really big scratches on it. Then all these 3 rings would have the same big scratch at the same position, and that would eventually give it away. So making the unwrap and creating this kind of a low poly model that we have here is also about, you know, finding that kind of a compromise to say, okay, these parts we want to share and other parts we want to keep unique. And in that case, I decided it's best that we have these rings here individually, even if it means that we have to mask them all out individually. I mean, it's not really the end of the world, is it? And then we can also have some unique wear and tear once we are done with that. And it's gonna definitely add to the nice look of our final texture once we're done. So let's carry on here and connect these parts with our metal 2 masking information. And I really like the material for both the metal 2 and the metal 1. I like that they have this contrast. They look very different to each other. Even though right now we are looking at this green material, but you know what it looks like, the metal 2, once we get rid of the green material. And this is always a nice thing to do when you have all this ZBrush details that we have here that we are using to mask along. Then it's definitely necessary to, you know, let the materials speak for themselves pretty much. Have a contrast there. We don't just want to have the same look all over the place. And that is the beauty of Substance Painter, to be so flexible here with all our different smart materials and wear and tear styles. That way we can really sell the look and make it unique and interesting. And I think I masked them all, or we masked them all. So now let's take a look here at that part that I mentioned earlier. It's still wood, and it shouldn't be, which should be a part of our metal 1 folder. So let's go on the black mask, use the polygon fill here, and let me switch over here to the UV selection to also select that other piece that was missing there, the other UV island. So now let's jump back here to tangent and object so that we can work here in the 3D view. I'm going to press F2 to get out of the split screen. And for that, I find it easier to work in the 3D view here. Let's just make sure we are on the right side here, since we are sharing the UV islands there on the other side. And then let's carry on by masking this here. Once again, the gold really helps to make it stand out. And then the same thing here on that side. This piece here should be a different kind of a material. Let's snap in here to the side view. The controls are very similar to ZBrush, so that makes it kind of nice. I think algorithmic, they were probably looking at ZBrush and getting some inspiration when it comes to the controls. So let's also mask that here, make sure we are precise. And now we have some cool looking contrasts here. Next, let's add our gold damaged into the gold folder. And let's add a black mask then. And then we are in the tangent and the object view. Not view, but mode. And in our 3D view, we can then add our gold here to it. So this here is sort of the dome, as I like to call it. And in general, the gold is just a nice finishing touch to make it look more expensive, the whole thing. Let's rotate around here, and then also let's have some of that here as gold. And this thing doesn't have any shared texture because we unwrapped it unique, so we have to do that on both sides. Let me just have the black brush to take away some of the overlapping we got there. And here I also want to have the black brush to make this here a bit more contrasty with the other material coming through it. So let's see where else we can apply this gold. Let's zoom in here on our center region. And these details here are looking good with some gold, I think. And now that I think of it, we should do the same thing that we did with the Metal 2 folder. Let's add a different or a new fill layer to it. And let's put it to a neon red. So that way, once again, it's easier for us to see where we're working on. And later we can disable that layer. I'm gonna jump back here into the 2D view. And I want to add some details here to these ring elements. So I feel like it's easier to be here in the 2D for that. Let me add some information here. And it doesn't matter if it kind of intersects that to the inside, because that's hidden by our spike element that we have on top of it. And I guess we should be in the UV and texture view. It still works if you are not, but sometimes it produces some errors. It doesn't look like it did it in that case, but just to make sure, we should be in UV and texture mode if we use the 2D view. So I'm gonna carry on here masking these pieces, and then once again, because it's 3 rings, we want to make sure we have that covered for all 3 of them. 2 down, 1 more to go. The gold just makes for a really nice finishing touch. In Warframe we call it the accents. You don't want to have that plastered all over the place. I mean, there might be exceptions, but in general those are the accents where it just makes everything look more expensive if there's a little bit of gold. And for something that is more science fiction and fantasy, it just works very well. That's why I also have some gold on the sword tutorial. Let's add some more gold also here on that part, on that ring. Let's always make sure that we also see in the 3D view what's going on, not just the 2D. And yeah, like I was saying, the sword is more of an elegant weapon, where this mace here is more like a brutal weapon, you know? You really whack someone with that. So let's have some more gold here on that. These 2 parts here, these tiny details, and I forgot something here on the metal too. Let's go back there and let's add some masking information, or more like take away from it here with a black brush. Let's take a look, and then let's go back here to our gold. Let's disable the red layer. See what it looks like here with our proper gold material. And I would say that looks pretty nice. We have some good contrast here. Let's also add some gold here on these pieces. We just gotta find the piece that was actually unwrapped. And it was this one here. So sometimes you just have to find it in the 3D view at least. And then let's paint some gold here. And one thing that we could do is turn back on here the symmetry. That way we are working on both sides. Let me put the red material back on so that it's a bit easier to really see where we are. Otherwise that chromy metal and the gold look too similar aside from the color, and this here makes a better contrast to do that work. So now we have to do the same thing here at the bottom. I actually got the idea for this mace tutorial when I was in the War Museum in London in the UK. Which, by the way, was very impressive to be in London. I've only been to London once before when I was a child, like 12 years old. But being there as like an adult, like, holy crap, I was deeply impressed by London. Such an awesome city. Reminds me a bit of New York. Just older, you know? And I was in the War Museum there, which was, by the way, free. I don't even know if it was called War Museum or what the exact name was, but it was an impressive museum where you can go in for free. And they had a lot of stuff there from World War I and basically all the wars until today, modern age. And one of them was the World War I section where they had all these custom-built maces that the soldiers built in the trenches. Really brutal stuff, very sad. But it got me the inspiration to make this mace tutorial. Let's put the tangent and the object back on. Let's turn that symmetry off, and let's also have these parts here as gold. I'm gonna use the Shift key to make a vertical connection up here. Hold down, press Shift, and then click to your target point. Same as in ZBrush. And let me scroll around the 2D map to see what else could be golden. And how about that one here? Let's also add gold to that. And also here. And then here on that side also. So let's see what else. Let's do also that one here. And then on that side as well. And here it's better to do the 2D mode. Let's switch it back to UV and texture. I wish there was a shortcut for that. This toggle between UV and texture and tangent and object. Because I use it all the time and I always have to click a few times. Let's take that red layer off to see our gold here. Really starts shaping up now here, the maze. And how about also having this here as gold? This center piece that is sticking out there, out of the maze. And I'm just gonna make sure everything is precise here. We have a bit of an overlap here on the right side, but that's okay. Let's just mask everything here with gold, and then we can switch it to a black brush. That was the wrong brush. And take away from it. And let's scale the brush down a bit and take it up all the way here while pressing the Shift key. And also here I want to keep some of these edges that we already have there that are showing black thanks to our wear and tear on that smart material. And let's continue it the way up here. And if you remember the ZBrush part where we added this detail, that's when we jumped back a few subdivision levels to smooth out the detail work that we did before. And then we changed it to look like that here. So that was one of these occasions where we had to change our high poly model. And in order to do that, we were just jumping back on the subdivision levels and smoothed it out, and then just basically go up subdivision level by subdivision level, smooth it out on each one of them, and then we can add our details back on with an entirely new look. Meanwhile, I want this part here also to be golden. And I'm just gonna make it so that this wraps around here just with pure texture information, even if we don't have it here properly as a normal map. And let me just zoom in here and take a look at the 3D view to make sure we got that properly covered. And then let's see about this part here. That could also be a reverse mask so that not everything is gold up there, but we have some contrast with the other materials. And let's zoom in here with a smaller brush, and that here then could be gold again. These knobs. Very good to see here with our red material, and certainly all shaping up nicely. Let me put it back to tangent and object so that we can work here in our 3D view, because it's easier to work in the 3D view here on that sphere, because the unwrap for the sphere, the nature of a sphere is that when you unwrap it, it's not necessarily perfectly square and quartz. So it's easier than to work in the 3D canvas view as opposed to the 2D view. And this here is also gonna look really nice to have it all gold. Let me increase the brush size here and sort of stamp that in so that we have the perfect curvature there. And this here we could have then once again as the other material, the metal. I'm gonna have a black mask and take away here from that information, and also here on that side. So over here we still have some more masking work to do. And I mean, it couldn't be easier. We just have to go through it one by one and make sure we don't make any errors here as we follow along our normal map information. We don't want to have too much overlapping, or actually none at all. And then these tiny curves there, we're gonna have a smaller brush to cover them. So let's see about that part here, which could also be gold. So I'm gonna use our shift key here, and in that case I want it to be only metal there, these tiny bits. So this is looking good. I'm just gonna use an even smaller brush here to take away a little bit, and also here we have a bit of these fragments. Zooming in is definitely necessary, and sometimes, I mean, it depends on the size of your details, but you can always change the texture resolution here in the viewport to 4K. If you have like a super good computer, like the best of the best, then you could probably work in 4K, but I think in general 2D is like the standard where it makes sense to work in, because in general, you know, you probably wouldn't have it higher as 2K as a game resolution either, at least for our current generation of consoles and PC games. I mean, PC games usually tend to have higher resolution, but 4K would be quite exaggerated for like a maze like that here. And let's also add some information here to that spike. I'm gonna turn our symmetry mode back on so that we affect both sides here. And I want that here also to be gold. And now let's just press our shortcut for the split screen, F1, because once again it's going to be easier here to do this work in the 2D view. It's always a matter of what we are currently working on, and this here makes sense to be working on in 2D. So now let's find the rest of that part that we already put some color on. Or on a second thought, I'm just gonna use our UV tool and fill it here, the polygon fill, and then let's unmask these regions here. I'm gonna get out of the symmetry mode. And while we are still on that object, I also want to add some gold here and stamp it down there like that. Then increase the brush size and change our mask to black and then back to white. And that way we make that look a bit more interesting as it was before. So we are still not entirely done. Let's add some more gold information. For example, here on that part. So we are still here in our UV and texture settings for our brush. And let's carry on here with that. I'm gonna put the red material back on. And then carry on here to also fill that with the gold. And let's just take the whole thing here with our shift key. Let me undo that. And let's put these parts here as the main metal. Always good to have a little bit of contrast where we have these tiny filler details that we were doing earlier. So I'm just gonna have a smaller brush here to make that a bit more precise, and also here on that side. Let's press F3 to go into the full 2D view here. And while we have our small brush, let's just carry on here to do the same pattern that we did on top. I'm just gonna use the shift key here and then invert our mask while also using the shift key to make sure that this whole element here is properly masked. Also over here. And let's spare out that piece that we have there in the center. And now the corners, and also here this piece still needs some information. And I'm just gonna get out of that view back into our 3D view. And let's see where else we could do some gold masking. How about these pieces here? I think those will look good to also be gold. And I'm just gonna have it here as our red material once more. Also here. And now I think we got a pretty decent looking piece. This one here could also need some extra gold. So let me zoom in here. We are still in our 2D brush settings with the UV and the texture. So it's easy to do. And then over here, we also want to add it. So now we just got one more left, which is here on that side. And now we have this nice expensive look here with our different metals and our gold and the wood. So now we have all our base materials here properly masked out. And let's just close these folders so that it's not so cluttered there. And let's go back here to our wood folder. And let's add an extra fill layer here on top. So what I want to do with that is add a black mask. And then let's add onto that black mask a generator. And let's add the dirt generator. Let's have some customized wear and tear here, only for our wood. And I'm gonna put it here to a soft light. If we toggle that, you can see the difference. Before it looked just a bit too pristine and too perfect. And I'm gonna bring the roughness down on it here as well. So now if we shift our lighting source, you can see the difference. And if we go into the roughness view here, you also see it. We have just more of an interesting noise here. So these are the default settings that our dirt generator came with, but that doesn't mean that we have to leave it with the default settings. Let's see if we can increase, for example, the contrast here so it's not entirely noisy. And then let's also go over here. You see how these sides now are maybe a little bit too strong. We're gonna take care of that. For now, let's use our grunge scale here and put it to like a 1. So we have a bit more of bigger chunks there. Same as here. Let's bring the overall level down a bit. It might be a little bit too over the top. So let's just bring it down here on a subtle amount, 7.2. And on the actual material itself, let's also add some height information. So I'm gonna have it here around these levels. You see my parameters there on the right side. And this might actually be a bit too strong even. So I'm gonna lower that amount of height information. And I also wanna give this layer a name here. So let's double click that fill layer and I'm just gonna call it lighten. And now onto that fill layer, I'm gonna press Ctrl D to make a duplicate of it. And I want to change the blend mode to normal. So you see how now it looks very intense. I'm gonna put the color to a black. And that way we have a wear and tear here on the wood that looks like some proper deep dirt. And I'm gonna bring our contrast down here. Let's see how that works. That looks pretty nice. And then let's just toggle it to see the difference here. I'm just gonna jump into the channel view here to also see our roughness. And let's toggle that. And here on that new layer that we just duplicated, I wanna make it a bit more glossy so that this looks like some sort of an oil film that is there in the corners. And let me just put that color here to more of like a dark gray. Doesn't have to be pitch black. And let's also take a look at it here at the upper part. Always important to toggle the layers on and off. And let's give this here the name dirt. So let's go back to the mask of our lighten layer. Click on the mask and let's do some extra work here. I want to add a paint layer to it. And then on our brushes, I'm gonna use this one here. The third one from the upper row as seen from the left perspective. And then while we are here in our 2D view, I'm gonna, let's scroll down to see how it got affected. I'm gonna have some masking information going around here to make it also look like there's some proper damage done. We want to have like a really small brush for that, just some tiny details really. And let's take a look here. Let's also use the shift key to affect these regions here on the upper parts. So you just witnessed me here doing that without having put the brush back into the texture mode, UV and texture. Sometimes, you know, I'm voice narrating these tutorials after I recorded them, and then I see my own mistake and I'm kind of ashamed, but it happens. But it doesn't mean we don't get the job done. It's just that you see the struggles that I'm having here. And I guess while I was recording that, it was probably already pretty late and I didn't really pay attention that I am not in the right brush mode here. If we had it here in the UV and texture view, as you should have it, it's more responsive, the brush. But still we get the job done. Let me just toggle that paint layer. And you can definitely see how this adds to the whole thing here. We're just making sure that the wear and tear is, you know, kind of affecting the areas where these metal rings are pressing down on the wood. And basically the look that we want to sell here is that because of the rings pressing down hard on the wood, it was, you know, kind of destroying the polish that was on that wood before. And having that just adds some extra realism to it here. So here we have the last piece. Let's also add some extra lighten information here on our wood, so that it doesn't look so perfectly cut off there without any damage at all. And we don't want to have it all like a perfect line. This is very important when it comes to wear and tear, to really change it up and not make it look like it's a perfect straight line of wear and tear. So if we toggle that, we can see that this certainly worked pretty well. So now let's create a fill layer. I'm gonna call it AO. And what I want to do is go over here and disable everything aside from the color mode. And then let's click on base color and filter for ambient. And then let's click on our ambient occlusion map. And then let's put the blend mode to multiply. So that way we get some extra depth here throughout our ambient occlusion. And we don't need to have it here at 100. Let's bring it down. Let's have it somewhere here around 25. And that way we have some extra depth. Let's duplicate that layer, Ctrl D, and I'm gonna call it curvature. But that one I want to have our blend mode set to overlay. And let's go back to the base color. Search for the curvature, and now we also have some extra details coming from our curvature map. That is sort of like, you know, the extra little thing on top that just adds some extra contrast. You can play around here with the strength of that. I'm gonna have it here at 40. So this is pretty much our Mace texture here. Only a few things left, but let's just take a look at it and see what we achieved. And one thing that I always like to add on top is a sharpen filter. So let's zoom in here so that we are able to see the difference once we add it. And then let's add not a fill layer, but a layer. And I'm gonna have this layer here added with a filter, and then let's search for sharpen, and let's add this sharpen filter here to that layer. So at the moment you won't be able to see any difference. That's because we have to put our blend mode for that layer to pass through. And now you see definitely the difference. I don't want it to be too strong, just a little bit to add that extra contrast here. We can also cycle through our channels here if we press C. And then let's just have it here at 0.3, maybe the sharpening. I think this definitely adds some nice extra contrast that we should keep. And basically the AO, curvature, and the sharpening, that's something that I always add on top as a finishing touch. So as a last thing, let's go back to that wood material, and actually let's just be here on that dirt layer, and on top of it we create a new fill layer. And I'm gonna disable everything aside from the roughness and the height information on that. And then let's add a black mask, and onto that black mask we're gonna add a fill layer. This one here, add fill, and then let's click on that grayscale button and filter for scratches, and I want to have this one here, grunge scratches rough. So we don't see much of it yet because we haven't added height information. Let's zoom in here and let's scroll down on our main material here, and then let's bring down the roughness. Right now it's very glossy. Let's put it here to non-glossy, somewhere at 0.9, and now if we play with the height information we really see those scratches. So I'm gonna have it here at 0.1 minus 0.1 so that we have the depth, and that way this looks like it has seen some serious battle. Let's click on the mask and then press C so that we go into the channel view for the mask, and that way it's easier for us to see where these scratches are actually at. And what I want to do here is bring that balance down so that it's not so super extreme as it was before. And also our scratch quantity, let's bring that down to 0.5. Looks about right. And then back on our mask here, or actually back on our generator, let's put that squash quantity even lower here, 0.47, and we can seed it. If you click that random button, it will just generate them in different areas with the same parameters. And I just want to make sure we don't have too much of this butterfly effect where the texture is tiling. I think this looks pretty good. I just want to go back here pressing C onto our channel view while we are on the mask, and then on the grunge scratch generator let's increase it a tiny bit more, the balance, so that we see some more of that. So this concludes our Mace tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it, and of course I hope to see you in the sword tutorial, which by the way is more in-depth and goes much longer than the Mace tutorial. So this is the perfect tutorial if you really want to go deep down the rabbit hole of ZBrush. So I hope to see you there. Cheers, Tim.